Hello, this is Father Rich. I'm here with our next masterpiece of the 75 masterpieces that every Christian should know series that we're doing. I'm here in the Rectory at Our Lady of Peace. I actually have a small little version of the next masterpiece. It's called the Book of Kells. I got this in Dublin at Trinity College when I visited there back in 2007. It's actually not the book itself, but a summary of it with some of the artwork. And so it goes back to, this takes us to the 6th century, and the masterpiece is an actual Bible. It's the Word of God, and obviously the significance of the Word of God, and particularly in that time frame, the monks at the monasteries putting in, days and years into not only transcribing the Word of God and making new Bibles, but beautifying it through artwork. And so the Book of Kells, they say, is probably the most beautiful Bible that's illuminated, an illuminated manuscript, as they sometimes call it. And it actually came from a monastery in Scotland, which probably was, again, made somewhere in that 6th century, in the 500s. But in the late 600s, the Vikings raided the monastery, killed quite a few in the community. They escaped to Ireland, eventually settled in a place called Kells, not far from Dublin. And that's where the book was held for years, and that's where it got its name. Eventually, it obviously made its way into Dublin, is now held at Trinity College in the museum there. But really a remarkable piece of work. Remember at that time, prior to making such kind of manuscripts, they would have used scrolls. But eventually those scrolls became very difficult to use, and if you wanted to go back to look something up, it could be very cumbersome. So this new kind of technology developed of creating parchment pages and tying them together so that you could flip through them and go back and forth, kind of the precursor to the book that we now know. And so the Book of Kells was one of these. And they say the Book of Kells, and a book like it, could have taken up to a year for a monastery to make, as all the monks could be involved in anywhere from making the parchment to tying it together to transcribing the words to the actual artwork. The Book of Kells, they suspect that 3 artists may have been responsible for creating the artwork there. And they would do artwork from anything from the sacred and sacred symbols and pictures of the evangelists, and Christ and etc., to these, kind of the humorists. They kind of have a fun balance in the Book of Kells where they put little jokes in there from the monks. You might see little writings in the, margins about, the tedious work that they were having to do, or they couldn't wait till dark came so they could end the day. But nonetheless, beautiful piece of work. There are other books such as the Book of Kells and even predecessors to it from Ireland, but most people agree that this is the most beautiful of these books. So remember, the monks were really responsible for, and I remember one book I read called How the Irish Saved Civilization. The monasteries on the islands of the British Isles in Scotland, Ireland, England, that in the monasteries, they really preserved a lot of the ancient books and writings and wisdom and knowledge of the ancient people when the rest of Europe was in the Dark Ages and being overtaken by the barbarians and very little civilization. And so they really, they took this seriously. It was not only a contribution for knowledge, but obviously a way to worship God and to pray. And so they put a lot of time into these manuscripts. And so we're certainly grateful for the time that they put in for that. Eventually, remember that after these books, they would have, in one point in the chapter, they talks about that these books almost were more valuable than human life. They talk about one story about an abbot of a monastery where a fire started in Syria, and he started throwing books out the window as long as he could until he perished because of how important these libraries and these books were. One of the quotes talks about, like, the books are to monks and monasteries as, the troops are to states. They're their life, so to speak. And but eventually, then remember that the invention of the printing press in the 1400s would make books much more accessible, make the Bible much more accessible. So the preciousness of each book, and certainly the Bible, was not as significant, but still important. And they also talked about how, the books they would use in liturgy and mass in the church would be much more ornate and beautiful, like the Book of Kells, whereas books that they might be using for the missionaries or going out and trying to teach or to pray with people in the fields and whatnot, that would be much more simple and less elaborate. So really a fascinating part of our history. I'm glad they included this type of artwork in this 70 list of 75, and encourage you to check it out if you haven't seen that type of artwork that the monks did for years and with great devotion and piety. So thank you for joining us. Next session will be on Gregorian chant. We'll move into music, and I hope you'll join us and have a great day. God bless.